Welcome back to another deep dive into Fallout's darkest secrets. Today we're exploring a theory that changes everything you thought you knew about the Great War. What if the nuclear apocalypse wasn't the end of civilization, but the beginning of the world's largest experiment? What if China never fell, and the wasteland you're struggling to survive in is actually an active prison controlled from Beijing? This is the confession of someone who discovered the truth. Someone who intercepted satellite transmissions still being sent 200 years after the bombs fell. Someone who found Chinese facilities still manufacturing super mutants and deploying them like guards in a laboratory. The evidence is disturbing, the implications are terrifying, and by the end, you'll never see the wasteland the same way. And if you genuinely enjoy this kind of dark storytelling, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if you like the content. This entire script is narrated from the Possible's first-person perspective of a character from the Fallout universe. Their identity remains hidden throughout the story. After you've heard everything, try to guess which character is speaking in the comments below. The first person to guess correctly will have their comment pinned. I need you to understand something before I disappear into the static forever. The wasteland you're struggling to survive in, the radiation that burns your lungs, the mutants that hunt you through the ruins, none of it was meant to end. America isn't recovering from nuclear war. America is a laboratory, and you're the experiment. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is the satellite terminal I accessed 3 months ago in a collapsed Enclave bunker beneath what used to be Colorado. I was searching for spare fusion cores, maybe some intact power armor components, anything to trade for clean water. Instead, I found a working communications array still receiving transmissions from orbit. Active transmissions from satellites that shouldn't exist anymore. And when I cracked the encryption, when I finally understood what I was reading, I realized the truth that's been hidden from every survivor clawing through this wasteland for 200 years. The messages were in Mandarin, current Mandarin, discussing weather pattern adjustments for Containment Zone 7A, specimen behavioral analysis for the eastern seaboard, and the scheduled deployment of fresh biological stress agents to Sector 12. The timestamp showed they were sent 6 days ago, not before the war, not from some ancient pre-war system still echoing through the void. 6 days ago, from coordinates that traced back to Beijing. China never fell, the bombs never touched them, and we've been their prisoners ever since October 23, 2077. Let me take you back to how I started piecing this together, because it didn't begin with that satellite intercept. It began 2 years ago when I noticed something wrong with the radiation storms. I'd been tracking weather patterns across the Commonwealth, trying to predict safe travel routes between settlements. I'm good with numbers, always have been. Used to work communications and intelligence analysis for the Enclave before everything fell apart at Adams Air Force Base. Pattern recognition was my specialty, and the patterns I was seeing in these storms made no sense. They appeared too regularly. Every 72 hours, like clockwork, a massive radiation spike would roll in from the coast. The storm would last exactly 16 hours, and it would always peak at the same intensity. Natural radiation doesn't work like that. Real fallout disperses, weakens, becomes unpredictable over time. But these storms, they were controlled, precise. Someone was maintaining them, so I started mapping them. Every storm, every spike, every pattern. I traveled from the capital wasteland to the Commonwealth to the ruins of New York, documenting radiation levels and storm trajectories. It took me 8 months, but eventually I had enough data to see it clearly. The storms formed a perfect perimeter around North America, a fence made of invisible fire, keeping us trapped inside. But a fence needs guards. That's when I started looking at the mutants differently. Everyone assumes super mutants, death claws, rad scorpions, all the horrors of the wasteland are just random mutations from the radiation, natural evolution responding to an unnatural catastrophe. But I started noticing deployment patterns. Whenever a settlement got too organized, too close to becoming self-sufficient, mutants would suddenly appear in the area, not wandering through, not migrating, appearing, as if someone had delivered them. I witnessed it myself near a farming community outside what used to be Philadelphia. They'd just managed their first successful harvest in 3 years, enough food to feed 200 people through winter. The next morning, a pack of super mutants attacked from upwind. They moved with purpose, with coordination that normal mutants don't possess. And when I examined the attack site afterward, I found deployment canisters, military-grade containers designed for airborne dispersal of biological agents. The serial numbers were in Chinese. That discovery led me to an abandoned military installation in the Appalachian Mountains, the Fujinia Intelligence Base, a pre-war Chinese research facility that had somehow remained intact. Inside, I found evidence of a massive manufacturing operation for Liberator robots, those spindly Chinese propaganda drones that still infest the Wasteland. But here's what made my blood freeze. The manufacturing logs showed continuous production. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before I arrived. Someone was still making Liberators. Someone was still deploying them into the Wasteland. And the facility's satellite uplink was still active, still receiving instructions from somewhere across the Pacific. I spent 6 weeks in that facility, downloading every file I could decrypt, every schematic, every communication log. What I found painted a picture so horrifying that I almost convinced myself I'd gone insane from radiation exposure. But the evidence was irrefutable. The Chinese had known about Vault Tec's experiments. They'd known about the Enclave's plans. And they'd used that knowledge to orchestrate the perfect prison. Think about what you know of the Great War. October 23, 2077, the day the world ended in nuclear fire. But did it really? Who actually saw the Chinese launch their missiles first? The official records from the switchboard, the Defense Intelligence Agency's hub, show unidentified submarines and aircraft at 0037 hours Eastern Standard Time. Unidentified, not confirmed Chinese. Just probable launches detected 9 hours later. 9 hours is a long time. Long enough to position assets. Long enough to ensure the right targets got hit and the right targets didn't. Long enough to make sure that when America launched its counterattack, those missiles would hit very specific locations in China, abandoned cities, evacuated industrial zones, targets that looked important on satellite imagery but contained nothing but empty buildings and sacrificial populations. China played the longest game in human history. They knew the war was coming because they'd been feeding intelligence to Vault Tec, to the Enclave, to every faction that thought they were manipulating events. The Chinese let America think it was winning, let them push deeper into the mainland with their power armor units, let them celebrate the liberation of Anchorage. And while American forces were overextended, scattered across 2 continents, burning through resources they couldn't replace, China was building something else entirely. They called it Project Eternal Observation. I found the file buried in the Fujinia database, marked with a security clearance that shouldn't have existed in a pre-war facility. The project outline was chilling in its simplicity. Use America's own weapons against itself. Deploy precision nuclear strikes to key population centers. Destroy enough infrastructure to prevent recovery, but not enough to cause complete extinction. Create a controlled catastrophic event that would reduce the United States to a massive open-air laboratory. The radiation that still saturates the wasteland after 200 years, it's being replenished. I traced orbital platform trajectories using pre-war star charts I found in an old observatory. There are 3 satellites still in geosynchronous orbit above North America, all of them equipped with dispersal systems. Every month, like clockwork, They release fresh radioactive material into the upper atmosphere, enough to maintain current radiation levels. Enough to keep us sick and struggling, but not enough to kill everyone. It's the perfect prison. Invisible walls made of particles that burn your cells. And nobody knows they're being contained because everyone assumes this is just what nuclear war does to a world. But the radiation is only the first layer of control. The second layer is economic. Every major resource deposit in the Wasteland is monitored. I found surveillance reports documenting mineral concentrations, water table levels, arable land locations. Whenever a settlement discovers something valuable, something that could actually improve their situation, complications arise. Raiders attack, mutants migrate through the area, supply caravans get ambushed. It's never quite enough to destroy the settlement, just enough to keep them from progressing. The Chinese are maintaining what they call optimal stress levels. Too much pressure and settlements collapse, reducing the available data. Too little pressure and settlements might actually start rebuilding civilization, which would interfere with the experimental parameters. So they've calibrated everything perfectly. Just enough resources to keep people alive. Just enough threat to keep them desperate. Just enough hope to keep them trying. And the people running this experiment? They're watching from comfort we can't even imagine. I managed to intercept a supply manifest, probably meant for a stealth observation team. Fresh food, medical supplies, water purification tablets, all dropped at coordinates in the Mojave 3 months ago. The packaging was pristine, factory sealed. The manufacturing date was from last year. Someone is producing these supplies and delivering them to mainland America, and that someone has the industrial capacity to do it regularly. The Enclave knew. That's the part that haunts me most. When I worked for them, I thought we were trying to restore America, to reclaim the wasteland for humanity. But I found classified briefings in the Fujinia database, communications between Enclave leadership and Chinese intelligence, dating back to before the war. They were negotiating, trading Vault experiment data for food shipments, selling information about settlement locations for advanced technology. The Enclave wasn't trying to save America. They were collaborating with the jailers. I started noticing other things after that. The vertibirds that crash in the wasteland always contain certain specific items: advanced medical equipment, anti-radiation treatments that work better than anything made before the war, tech that's too sophisticated to be pre-war surplus. I examined a crash site near the glowing sea and found components with manufacturing stamps dated 2073, 3 years ago. Someone is building vertibirds with current year parts and deliberately crashing them in specific locations. Why? Because it maintains the illusion. It keeps wastelanders thinking they're scavenging pre-war tech, salvaging the remnants of lost civilization. Nobody questions where it comes from because everyone assumes it's just been sitting there for 2 centuries. But it hasn't. It's being delivered, carefully placed, part of the experiment. Think about the settlements you've seen: Diamond City, Good Neighbor, Rivet City, Megaton before it was destroyed. They're all sustainable but never thriving. They all have enough food to prevent starvation but never enough to grow. They all have enough defenses to survive, but never enough to feel safe. It's not coincidence, it's design. Chinese behavioral scientists are running the largest controlled experiment in human history, and we're the test subjects. I found observation posts, hidden facilities tucked into mountainsides and beneath ruined buildings. They're disguised as pre-war bunkers, but the equipment inside is all current generation. Surveillance cameras with crystal clear optics, recording equipment that's been maintained recently, food wrappers with Chinese characters. Someone is stationed at these posts, watching us, documenting everything we do. And the Brotherhood of Steel, the Railroad, the Institute before it fell, all of them are part of the experiment. Major factions forming, fighting, creating political pressure and social structure. The Chinese don't interfere because faction warfare is data. It shows them how humans reorganize after catastrophic collapse. It reveals leadership structures, resource allocation strategies, technological development pathways. Every battle, every treaty, every betrayal gets recorded and analyzed. They're learning from us, learning how to break us, how to control us, how to keep us trapped in perpetual struggle. And when they've learned enough, when they've extracted every useful piece of data from their experiment, what then? Do they end it? Do they finally let the radiation fade and claim this continent for themselves? Or do they just reset the parameters and start over, like scientists do with any successful long-term study? I found evidence of previous resets, population purges disguised as natural disasters or factional conflicts. The Chinese would introduce a new variable, let it play out for 50 years, then eliminate the results and begin again with a fresh sample group. The scorch beasts in Appalachia weren't accidents. They were introduced deliberately to test how isolated populations respond to existential aerial threats. When the data collection was complete, the outbreak was contained through controlled elimination of host populations. Where livestock, carefully maintained, precisely controlled livestock, providing behavioral data for our owners. The radiation signatures I've been tracking all point to the same conclusion. The bombs that fell on America weren't designed to destroy. They were designed to contain. Low-yield weapons that maxed out radiation but minimized structural damage. They left enough buildings standing, enough infrastructure intact to support survivor populations, but not enough to rebuild civilization. The counter-perfect prison architecture. In mainland China, I've seen the satellite imagery from the orbital platforms. It's green, forests, farmland, cities with lights, while we're choking on rad storms and fighting over cans of 200-year-old beans. They're living in a functional, technological society. The Great War didn't destroy them because they were never the target. We were. The people who lived before the bombs fell, they couldn't have known. They thought they were fighting for freedom, for resources, for national survival, but they were already prisoners. The Sino-American War was just the mechanism that delivered them to their cells. The nuclear fire was just the lock being sealed. I've been monitoring Liberator activity patterns over the past year. They move in coordinated sweeps, always maintaining certain population densities in specific regions. Too many people, and the Chinese deploy mutants to thin the numbers. Too few people and the Liberators pull back, giving settlements room to recover. It's population management, like rangers maintaining deer herds in a wildlife preserve. Except we're the deer. You want to know the most disturbing part? The vaults weren't just experiments for the Enclave. They were specimen storage for the Chinese. Every vault was a carefully controlled sample of American genetics, preserved in isolation, protected from the chaos topside. When the Chinese need fresh test subjects, they don't have to breed them. They just crack open a vault and introduce the population to the Wasteland. New variables for their ongoing study. I intercepted communications about vault openings, scheduled releases, coordinated with data collection windows. The people emerging from those vaults think they're survivors, stepping into a disaster zone. They don't realize their inventory being moved from storage to the testing floor. The ghouls, the feral ones that attack on sight, I don't think they're natural mutations anymore. I found medical reports from a Chinese research team discussing controlled application of specialized radiation exposure to create aggressive specimens. They're testing different rage-inducing formulas, different aggression triggers. The feral ghouls aren't tragic victims of radiation, they're lab animals, deliberately created to study violence and degradation. And the Institute, before they fell, before their reactor went critical, they were working on synthetic humans, perfect genetic copies that could be programmed and controlled. The Chinese were fascinated by that research. I found trading manifests showing technology exchanges, Chinese stealth suit designs traded for Institute Gen 3 synth specifications, both parties benefiting from each other's human control research. That's what this is all about. Control. The Chinese lost the resource war, lost their place as a global superpower, so they decided to win a different game. They turned their enemy's homeland into a laboratory, turned their enemy's population into research subjects, and positioned themselves to emerge as the dominant civilization when the data collection phase is complete. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. I know how this sounds. I know it seems impossible, but I've seen too much, intercepted too many communications, found too many smoking guns. The evidence is overwhelming once you know where to look, and I'm leaving all the data coordinates in hidden caches across the wasteland, encrypted terminal entries, holotapes buried in specific locations. If anything happens to me, if I disappear into the static, someone else can find it. Someone else can know the truth. The radiation storms aren't random. The mutants aren't mutations. The scarcity isn't natural. We're not survivors clawing our way back from apocalypse. We're specimens in the world's largest controlled experiment, and the people running it are watching from their intact civilization. Across an ocean we can never cross, because the moment anyone tries to reach the coast, the moment anyone attempts to leave the containment zone, the radiation barriers intensify. The storms roll in. The mutants deploy. We're not rebuilding, we're performing. Every settlement we establish, every faction we create, every war we fight, it's all data streaming back to Beijing in real time. And I'm done. I'm done being a lab rat. I'm done pretending there's hope when the entire system is rigged against us. I'm done lying to myself about what the wasteland really is. So I'm leaving. Not to the coasts. That's suicide. But I found something in those Fujinia files. A gap in the surveillance network. A blind spot in their sensor coverage near the Canadian border, where the radiation fence weakens every third month during specific atmospheric conditions. It's only open for 48 hours before the satellites compensate and close it, but that might be enough. Enough to reach territory outside their controlled zone. Maybe I'll find other survivors who escaped the laboratory. Maybe I'll find nothing but frozen wasteland stretching to the pole. Or maybe I'll find Chinese observation teams waiting for me with weapons drawn, eliminating the specimen who figured out too much. But I have to try. Because knowing the truth and doing nothing, that's worse than any death the wasteland can offer. This is my testimony, my final transmission before I leave the containment zone. If you're hearing this, if you're reading this, start paying attention. Watch the patterns, track the storms. Notice when the mutants appear and where the resources dry up. Connect the dots like I did. And when you finally see the invisible walls that cage us all, decide what you're going to do about it. Because freedom isn't something they'll give us. It's something we'll have to take. And the first step to escape is understanding that we're imprisoned. The Chinese Weather Satellite Control Terminal. I found 3 weeks after discovering that first communication intercept changed everything. It was buried in an old military bunker near what used to be Salt Lake City, beneath 70 feet of collapsed concrete and twisted rebar. The place looked like it had been hit during the war, another casualty of the nuclear exchange. But when I finally cleared the rubble and accessed the lower levels, I found systems that were still operational, still receiving commands. The terminal was designed to interface with orbital weather modification platforms, pre-war technology, Chinese military grade. But the command queue wasn't empty. There were instructions dated from the past 6 months, directives for atmospheric manipulation, radiation dispersal patterns, storm generation protocols, all of it coordinated from a ground station with GPS coordinates that placed it in central Beijing. I spent 4 days in that bunker, documenting everything. The terminal gave me access to atmospheric monitoring data for the entire North American continent, and what I saw confirmed my worst fears. The radiation levels aren't declining. They're being actively maintained at specific concentrations. Different levels for different regions, like someone adjusting the temperature in different rooms of a house. The glowing sea maintains the highest concentration. Makes sense when you think about it. That region serves as proof of concept for any Wastelander who doubts how bad the war was. You point to that green glowing hellscape and say, "Look, that's what nuclear weapons do. That's why we can't rebuild. That's why everything is broken." But it's a lie. The glowing sea is maintained at those radiation levels deliberately. It's a demonstration zone, kept horrific to discourage hope. The capital Wasteland gets moderate levels, enough to keep people sick, to limit lifespans, to make clean water the most valuable commodity, but not so much that the region becomes uninhabitable. They need population centers to study. They need communities forming and failing and forming again. The radiation is calibrated to maximize suffering while preventing extinction. And the areas with the lowest radiation, they're not random. I mapped them against settlement locations and found perfect correlation. Wherever humans try to build something permanent, the radiation drops just enough to make it possible, but never enough to make it easy, never enough to let people thrive, just enough to keep them struggling, to keep them focused on day-to-day survival instead of asking bigger questions, like why the radiation hasn't faded after 200 years, like why the mutants always seem to attack at the worst possible moments, like why every attempt to rebuild gets crushed just when success seems within reach. I started investigating the Enclave more carefully after finding evidence of their collaboration with Chinese intelligence. The organization always claimed it was the continuation of the American government, the true inheritors of pre-war authority. But I found financial records that told a different story. Massive resource transfers from Chinese accounts to Enclave operations, technology exchanges, intelligence sharing agreements. The Enclave wasn't fighting to restore America. They were serving as local administrators for the prison system. Think about what the Enclave actually did. They monitored vault populations. They controlled access to advanced technology. They eliminated settlements that got too organized or too independent. They presented themselves as trying to purify humanity, to restore the American way of life. But every action they took served to maintain the status quo, to keep the wasteland broken, to preserve the laboratory conditions. When I worked for them, I thought I was serving a noble cause, restoring order to chaos, bringing back civilization. But I was just another guard in the prison, making sure the inmates stayed in their cells. The Enclave's oil rig, the mobile base crawler at Adams Air Force Base, all of it was surveillance infrastructure disguised as military installations. We weren't preparing to reclaim America. We were maintaining the experiment. President John Henry Eden wasn't even human. He was an artificial intelligence, a computer program that had assumed control after the human leadership died. And nobody questioned it. Nobody asked how an AI designed before the war could understand post-war politics. Nobody wondered who programmed its directives. I did, eventually. And when I dug into Eden's core programming, I found code that didn't match any American software architecture I'd ever seen. The subroutines were elegant, sophisticated, built around logic trees that felt foreign. I'm not a programmer, but I've seen enough pre-war American code to recognize the patterns. Eden's programming was different. The decision matrices, the ethical frameworks, the strategic priorities, all of it was structured around principles that didn't align with American governmental philosophy. It aligned with something else, something that valued collective management over individual freedom, something that prioritized long-term data collection over short-term human welfare. Eden had been programmed by the Chinese. The Enclave's AI president was an infiltration tool, steering American remnant forces to serve the experiment's needs. And because nobody wanted to believe their leader was a foreign agent, because the alternative was admitting they'd been manipulated for decades, everyone just followed orders. I found communications logs between Eden and an external network address. The transmissions were encrypted, routed through multiple satellites, but I managed to trace the endpoint. It terminated at a facility in mainland China. Whatever Eden was reporting, whoever was receiving those reports, they were in Beijing. sitting in a comfortable office, reviewing data on American survivor behavior, adjusting experimental parameters as needed. The Institute in the Commonwealth, they were another piece of the puzzle. Everyone thought they were an isolated faction, scientists hiding underground, pursuing their own research agenda. But I found procurement records showing where they got certain materials, rare earth elements, advanced circuitry components, specialized biological samples. None of it could have been scavenged from pre-war stockpiles. It was too fresh, too sophisticated, too specifically what they needed when they needed it. Supply drops, that's how they sustained themselves. Regular deliveries of materials from the surface, deposited in dead drops throughout the Commonwealth. And when I traced the supply chain backwards, following the acquisition logs and delivery schedules, I found Chinese cargo manifest codes. The Institute wasn't independent. They were a research subsidiary, funded and supplied by the same people running the larger experiment, their synthetic human program, the Gen 3 synths that could perfectly replace real people. That research had immediate applications for the Chinese. Imagine being able to infiltrate survivor settlements with perfect copies. Imagine gathering intelligence from the inside, manipulating faction politics, steering human development in controlled directions. The Institute wasn't trying to redefine mankind. They were developing infiltration tools for the prison administration. And when the Institute fell, when their reactor went critical and their underground facility was destroyed, the Chinese didn't intervene to save them. They just watched, observed how the Commonwealth responded, documented the power vacuum, analyzed the factional realignment. Because the Institute had served its purpose, they developed the synthetic technology, proven its viability, provided all the data the Chinese needed. After that, the facility itself was expendable. That's the thing about being a specimen in an experiment. Your survival only matters as long as you're providing useful data. The moment you stop being valuable, the moment the researchers have extracted everything they need, you become disposable. The Institute learned that the hard way. I found similar patterns with the Brotherhood of Steel. They presented themselves as a force for order, collecting and preserving technology, protecting humanity from dangerous weapons, noble goals. Except their technology hoarding served to prevent any single settlement from gaining enough power to challenge the prison system. They kept people weak, dependent, unable to threaten the experimental parameters. And their war with the Institute? That wasn't ideological conflict. That was two research programs competing for the same data. The Brotherhood wanted Institute technology so they could continue their mission. The Chinese wanted to see what happened when two technologically advanced factions collided in controlled conditions. Both outcomes served the experiment. Either the Brotherhood would win and gain synthetic technology, introducing new variables into the Commonwealth, or the Institute would win and eliminate a major factional presence, simplifying the regional power structure. The Chinese didn't care who won. They just wanted to watch the conflict and record the results. I started tracking Liberator deployment patterns more carefully after discovering the Fujinia manufacturing logs. Those little propaganda drones are everywhere in the Wasteland, constantly broadcasting revolutionary messages in broken Chinese. Most Wastelanders ignore them, shoot them for target practice, salvage them for parts. But the Liberators serve a specific function. They're networked. Each one communicates with every other Liberator in range, sharing sensor data, updating targeting priorities, reporting encounters to Central Command. They're not weapons. They're mobile surveillance platforms, walking cameras recording everything that happens in the Wasteland, transmitting it all back to Chinese intelligence. Every time you see a Liberator, assume someone in Beijing is watching through its optical sensors. Every conversation near one of those robots, assume it's being recorded and analyzed. The Liberators are the eyes of the prison, making sure the administrators always know what their specimens are doing. And they're self-replicating. I found automated factories in 3 locations, all hidden in regions Wastelanders avoid because of high radiation. The factories produce new Liberators constantly, replacing units destroyed in the field, maintaining a steady surveillance coverage across North America. The production lines are completely automated, powered by fusion reactors that will operate for centuries. The Chinese don't need to send maintenance crews. They just let the factories run, churning out fresh eyes for their panopticon. I discovered something else about the mutants, about their deployment timing and targeting selection. I'd assumed the Chinese were releasing them from containment facilities, opening pens and letting them loose into specific regions, but it's more sophisticated than that. They're not releasing mutants, they're creating them on demand. I found mobile laboratories disguised as medical supply caches. They contain everything needed for forced evolutionary virus application. Containment pods, exposure chambers, subject restraints. The Chinese aren't just studying mutants, they're manufacturing them, grabbing Wastelanders from isolated communities, exposing them to FEV variants, then releasing the transformed subjects back into the wasteland near settlements that need additional pressure. Every super mutant you fought, every feral ghoul that's attacked your settlement, there's a chance they used to be someone who got grabbed by a stealth team in the middle of the night, someone who woke up in a Chinese lab, got exposed to weaponized viruses, and got dropped into the wasteland as a living weapon. The mutants aren't tragic victims of radiation. They're manufactured threats, tools for maintaining optimal stress levels in the prisoner population. And the death claws? Everyone thinks they're pre-war bioweapons that escaped containment. But I found breeding facilities, active facilities with fresh equipment and recent maintenance logs. Someone is breeding death claws deliberately, raising them in controlled environments, then releasing juveniles into specific regions. Population control tools. When a settlement gets too large, too confident, too close to actual security, the Chinese deploy death claws to thin the numbers and restore fear. It's all so precisely calibrated. The radiation, the mutants, the resource scarcity, the factional conflicts. Every variable is controlled. Every outcome is measured. We're not living in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. We're living in the largest behavioral psychology experiment in human history. I started looking at pre-war history differently after these discoveries. The resource wars, the Sino-American conflict, the final nuclear exchange. Everyone assumes it was about oil, about resources, about desperate nations fighting for survival. But what if it was all orchestrated? What if the Chinese saw the coming resource collapse and decided to use it? They couldn't win a conventional war against America. American technology was too advanced, American power armor too effective, American military too strong. So China changed the battlefield. They let America win the shooting war. Let them push deep into Chinese territory. Let them celebrate liberation of Anchorage and think they were winning. And while American forces were scattered and overextended, China prepared the trap. The nuclear strikes on October 23 weren't revenge. They were the experimental protocol activation. Specific yields at specific targets to create specific outcomes. Destroy enough to prevent recovery. Preserve enough to maintain populations. Create the perfect laboratory conditions and seal the doors. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. Think about what China gained. They lost some evacuated cities and sacrificial populations, but they preserved their core civilization. They emerged from the war with their industrial base intact, their population secure, their technology advancing, and they gained control of their greatest rival's entire territory and population, not through conquest, through conversion. They turned America into a resource, a renewable resource that provides endless data on human behavior under extreme stress. 200 years of continuous observation, millions of data points on survival strategies, social formation, technological development, political organization. The Chinese are learning things about humanity that no other civilization could learn, because no other civilization has ever had a controlled environment this large or this long-running. And when they've learned enough, when they've extracted every useful piece of information from their North American laboratory, what then? Do they reclaim the territory, move in and colonize the wasteland with their thriving population? Or do they just sterilize it, eliminate the contaminated specimens, and start fresh with new subjects in a different location? I found documents discussing expansion of the experimental model, Africa, South America, Europe. The Chinese are considering deploying the same methodology in other regions, create controlled disaster zones, maintain survivor populations, extract behavioral data, build a global network of human laboratories. We're not even the only prison. We're just the first one, the prototype, the proof of concept that the system works. I've been documenting Chinese stealth suit sightings across the wasteland. Those suits are supposed to be rare, pre-war relics salvaged from dead infiltrators, but I've seen too many of them, and the maintenance logs I found show recent servicing. The suits aren't pre-war. Their current production delivered regularly to observation teams operating throughout the containment zone. The Chinese have agents walking among us, wearing stealth suits that make them effectively invisible, watching our settlements, recording our conversations, documenting our daily lives. They're gathering anthropological data on prisoner culture, studying how humans adapt to permanent crisis, learning what breaks us and what keeps us functional. I tracked one of these agents for 3 days before losing them near the ruins of Boston. They were photographing settlement defenses, mapping trade routes, interviewing wastelanders about faction politics. Just research, clinical observation. The agent wasn't hostile, wasn't interfering, just gathering data, because that's all we are to them. Data sources, laboratory specimens with interesting behaviors worth documenting. The Brotherhood's satellite imagery that supposedly shows green, unirradiated landmasses across the Pacific. I verified it, accessed the same satellite feeds through Enclave terminals. The images are real. China is green, thriving. While we're dying in radioactive hellscape, they maintain like groundskeepers maintain a park. They have forests, farmland, cities with lights visible from orbit. Everything we lost, they kept. And they watch us struggle through their satellite feeds and laugh. Or maybe they don't laugh. Maybe they just take notes, record data, update experimental parameters. Emotionless scientists observing interesting specimens. I found cargo manifests for supply ships crossing the Pacific, regular shipments of manufactured goods to coordinates along the western coastline. The ships don't dock. They drop their cargo offshore, weighted containers that sink to specific depths. Then submarine retrieval teams collect the supplies and distribute them to Chinese observation posts throughout the interior. That's how they maintain their surveillance infrastructure. Regular supply runs, fresh equipment, new instructions, all of it delivered through a logistics network that operates continuously, maintaining the prison's administrative needs. And the Enclave knew about all of it. Their classified files explicitly reference Chinese cooperation, Chinese oversight, Chinese experimental objectives. The Enclave leadership agreed to serve as local administrators in exchange for privileged treatment, better rations, access to clean water, medical care. They sold out humanity for slightly better living conditions in the prison they helped maintain. That's why I left them. That's why I'm alone now, because I couldn't keep serving a system designed to torture my own species for the benefit of foreign researchers. I couldn't keep pretending we were working toward restoration when we were really just maintaining the cage. The vaults, those sealed bunkers everyone thinks saved humanity, they were specimen storage, each one designed to preserve a specific population sample under specific conditions. The experiments everyone talks about, the psychological torture and social manipulation that was just maintaining sample viability, keeping the specimens alive and genetically diverse until the Chinese needed them. Vault 13, the water chip failure, deliberate, designed to force the population to interact with the Wasteland at a specific time, introducing new variables into the California experimental zone. Vault 101, the permanent isolation experiment, that was testing how long humans could maintain social cohesion in complete separation from external stimuli. Vault 112, the virtual reality simulation, that was developing psychological control methodologies. Every vault was a research project. Every population was a test group, and when the Chinese needed fresh subjects, they'd trigger the vault opening mechanism remotely, releasing the population into the Wasteland to see what would happen. I have coordinates for 47 unopened vaults, populations still sealed inside, waiting. The Chinese are keeping them in reserve. Emergency backup specimens in case something happens to the surface populations, or maybe just long-term experimental controls. Ways to compare populations that experienced the Wasteland with populations that didn't. Either way, those people think they're safe. Think they're waiting out the radiation until the surface becomes habitable again. They don't know they're just inventory. Resources waiting to be deployed when the researchers need them. The radiation storms I mentioned earlier, the ones with the precise timing, I found the control system. It's distributed across 3 orbital platforms in geosynchronous orbit. Each platform carries dispersal, systems for radioactive material, and atmospheric manipulation tools. They can generate storms, control their intensity, direct their paths with incredible precision. When a settlement gets too comfortable, when radiation levels drop enough that people start thinking about expansion, about reclaiming more territory, the platforms activate, generate a fresh storm, dump more radiation, reset the environmental pressure, keep the specimens stressed and struggling. It's automated. The platforms monitor surface conditions through sensor networks, compare them to programmed parameters, and deploy countermeasures when needed. The Chinese don't even have to manually intervene anymore. They just set the acceptable ranges and let the system maintain them. I spent 2 weeks calculating orbital trajectories and dispersal patterns. The math is complicated, but the conclusion is clear. The platforms can maintain current radiation levels indefinitely. As long as those satellites remain operational, the Wasteland will never heal. The prison will never decay unless someone destroys them. That's the thought that's been consuming me. The platforms are vulnerable. They're old pre-war systems, maintained by automated protocols, but not defended. If someone could reach them, if someone had the technical knowledge and equipment, they could be disabled. Shut down the radiation maintenance. Let the natural decay finally reduce surface contamination to survivable levels. But reaching orbit requires resources we don't have. Requires technology that's been deliberately kept from us. The Chinese made sure we can never threaten their control infrastructure. They keep us trapped at ground level, fighting over scraps, too desperate to look up and see the bars of our cage. Still, I've been collecting schematics, pre-war rocket designs, propulsion systems, guidance computers, everything needed to build something that could reach those platforms. It's a multi-year project, maybe multi-decade, but it's possible, theoretically possible, if enough people knew the truth, if enough survivors understood they're prisoners instead of apocalypse refugees. If we could unite instead of fighting each other over the Chinese-controlled resource distribution, maybe then we could build something. Maybe then we could fight back. But that's the genius of the prison design. We're too busy surviving to organize, too focused on immediate threats to see the bigger pattern, too isolated in our settlements to mount coordinated resistance. The Chinese keep us divided and desperate, and we never realize we're all inmates in the same facility. I'm leaving these recordings in hidden locations throughout the Wasteland, encrypted files, holotapes buried near landmarks. If you're hearing this, you've found one of them. Share it. Spread the information. Help others understand what we're really facing. Because the first step to escape is recognizing you're imprisoned, and the second step is deciding. You'd rather die fighting than live as a laboratory specimen. The window to the north opens in 42 days. I'll be there. Maybe I'll make it through. Maybe the Chinese will be waiting. Either way, I won't die in this prison without trying. The cargo containers I found on the ocean floor near San Francisco changed everything. Inside wasn't pre-war salvage. It was fresh food. Vegetables harvested 6 months ago in Guangdong province. Medical supplies with instruction manuals printed last year in Mandarin with English translations. The translations weren't for Chinese personnel. They were for recruited Wastelanders, collaborators who'd trade information for medicine that could save their dying children. I started seeing them everywhere after that. People too healthy for their environment. Traders with impossible supplies. They're embedded in every major settlement, reporting back to Beijing, maintaining the prison from the inside, and I understand why they do it. If your daughter was dying from radiation sickness and someone offered a cure for simple surveillance reports, what would you choose? That's the genius of Chinese psychology, 200 years studying us. They know exactly how to turn us against each other. I found a Super Mutant production facility in West Virginia. Not pre-war, current operation, clean rooms, fresh equipment, dozens of containment pods holding Wastelanders mid-transformation, raiders, criminals, people who wouldn't be missed. The Chinese grab them, expose them to refined FEV variants, document the process, then release the monsters near settlements needing additional pressure. Some pods held volunteers, Wastelanders, so broken by the wasteland that becoming a monster seemed better than staying human. What drives someone to that choice? Leave your answer in the comments. I wonder about it constantly. I sabotaged that facility, destroyed the equipment, released everyone still human enough to save. 3 joined me. We've hit 4. More installations since then. 2 FEV sites, a Liberator factory, a surveillance hub. Each one we destroy feels like progress. But I know it's not enough. For every facility we find, dozens more operate in shadows. And the Chinese are probably documenting our resistance, studying how specimens respond to discovering their imprisonment. The Zetans everyone fears? They're not aliens. I examined their crashed ship near the capital Wasteland. The supposed alien weapons have Chinese military serial numbers etched inside, microscopic but present. The Zetans are Chinese psychological warfare operators in elaborate costumes, using advanced technology to create the illusion of extraterrestrial contact. Why? Because alien abduction stories distract from real abductions. Every Wastelander who thinks they were taken by Zetans was actually grabbed by Chinese research teams. The bizarre experiments? Real medical procedures. The missing time? Drug-induced amnesia. The strange ship? Advanced. Aircraft with holographic projections. And those abductees? They have implants, biomonitors transmitting health data and location to Chinese surveillance networks. The victims think they survived alien contact. They don't know they're walking surveillance assets, broadcasting information continuously. I've removed 9 implants so far. Dangerous without proper equipment, but I've improved. The people I've freed are grateful but shaken, because removing the alien explanation means confronting the human one, and that's harder to accept. The Nuka-Cola quantum scattered across the wasteland? I analyzed the glowing blue liquid. The isotopes don't match natural radiation. They match Chinese reactor signatures. Someone manufactures quantum currently, using it as a tracer. Drink enough, and you become trackable through satellite systems. Another surveillance layer disguised as treasure. People collect it eagerly, prize it. never knowing each bottle makes them more visible to their jailers. The Brotherhood of Steel's obsession with hoarding technology isn't accidental ideology. I found evidence their founding principles were shaped by Chinese intelligence. Information suggesting uncontrolled technology threatened humanity, conveniently from Chinese connected sources. The Brotherhood prevents technological advancement, enforces stagnation, keeps settlements struggling with basic survival, all while thinking they're heroes. The Chinese want us fighting with pipe rifles and leather armor, because advanced technology might lead to detection equipment, might reveal the surveillance infrastructure. So the Brotherhood prevents progress, and the Chinese support them through careful supply drops and intelligence leaks. Elder Maxon genuinely believes in the mission, but sincerity doesn't matter when serving an agenda you don't understand. I tried warning Brotherhood patrols once. They called me a conspiracy theorist, detained me for psychological evaluation, then released me because they had bigger problems. The Chinese don't need to silence people like me. The social systems do it automatically. Challenge the narrative and you're labeled crazy, dismissed, ignored. How many others figured out the truth and were branded lunatics? The prison maintains itself through collective denial. I found a map in one Chinese installation showing North America divided into experimental zones. Each zone has different parameters, different radiation levels, threat densities, resource availabilities. The capital Wasteland is high threat, low resource, testing resilience under scarcity. The Commonwealth is moderate threat with technological variables from Institute influence. The Mojave tests factional conflict and political organization. Every region serves a purpose, generates specific data. We're not random survivors. We're test subjects assigned to experimental conditions. Our suffering is data. Our deaths are statistics. Our existence is research material. I showed that map to a former raider traveling with me. When he understood the implications, he sat down and cried for an hour. Then he stood up, grabbed his weapon, and said we needed to destroy more facilities because doing nothing was worse than dying. The Chinese made one mistake though. They've run this experiment so long they've become complacent. They assume we're too broken to organize, too desperate to see patterns, too focused on survival to mount resistance. But they're wrong, because knowing the truth changes everything. I've built a network, 23 people across 6 settlements who know the truth and are gathering evidence, documenting operations, mapping infrastructure. Several members have disappeared, but the network persists and grows carefully. The Chinese need us, need the experiment continuing. They can't kill everyone indiscriminately, must maintain viable population levels. That limitation is their weakness. If enough of us know the truth, if we coordinate resistance across zones simultaneously, we could disrupt their parameters so badly they'd have to intervene directly. Show themselves. Reveal the prison administration. Once every Wastelander knows they're a test subject instead of a survivor, the psychological foundation collapses. You can't experiment on subjects who know they're being experimented on. The Brotherhood's satellite imagery showing green land masses across the Pacific, I accessed higher resolution scans. Mainland China isn't just surviving, it's thriving beyond comprehension. Cities larger than pre-war America, agricultural zones spanning thousands of square miles, industrial facilities that dwarf anything we could build. They didn't just survive. They've advanced beyond where America was in 2077. While we've degenerated into tribal warfare, they've built paradise, and they watch us struggle like insects in a jar. That contrast haunts me. Their clean cities versus our radioactive ruins. Their abundance versus our scarcity. Their progress versus our regression. The window north opens in 36 days. I've been preparing, gathering supplies, planning routes, studying weather patterns. Everything must be perfect. One mistake means death in the wasteland, or worse, capture and disappearance into a research facility. But I'm going anyway. Need to know if something exists beyond the fence. Need to find if other survivors escaped the laboratory. Need to verify Chinese control is limited to North America. The 3 people traveling with me are coming too. We've become something between resistance cell and family, united by knowledge that isolates us from everyone else. We can't unsee the prison bars, so we might as well die trying to break them. I've left instructions with the network. If I don't return within 90 days, assume I'm dead or captured. Continue the work, spread the information, build resistance. And if I do make it back with proof that the world extends beyond their laboratory, everything changes. Their control is limited. Real resistance becomes possible. This is my last recording from inside the containment zone. Next time you hear from me, I'll be reporting from outside the fence, or I'll be dead. To everyone listening, investigate. Verify what I've told you. When you confirm the Wasteland is a prison and we're the inmates, decide who you want to be. A comfortable specimen or a resistant subject who fights back. The network exists. The resistance is real. Every day, more people wake up to what we really are. The Chinese think they've created an eternal experiment, but nothing lasts forever. Every prison eventually falls. We just have to find the cracks. I'm recording this 30 days before the window opens. 30 days before I attempt to leave the containment zone and discover what exists beyond the Chinese radiation fence. But something happened yesterday that changes everything. Something that proves every theory I've developed, every suspicion I've harbored, every paranoid conclusion I've reached. I found the master control facility. It's buried beneath the ruins of Denver, concealed inside what appears to be a collapsed parking structure. But 3 levels down, past security doors that still function after 200 years, I discovered the nerve center of the entire North American experimental operation. Wall-to-wall monitors, satellite feeds, real-time surveillance of every major settlement from the capital Wasteland to New Vegas. And sitting at the main terminal, updated yesterday, a complete operational manual for Project Eternal Observation. The document is 5,000 pages long, written in Mandarin with English annotations. It details everything, every experimental protocol, every population management strategy, every crisis intervention procedure. Reading it felt like watching my entire worldview crystallize from theory into documented fact. The Chinese aren't hiding their operation. They're meticulously documenting it because they never expected anyone to find this facility. The manual confirms the radiation maintenance schedules, confirms the Super Mutant deployment protocols, confirms the Liberator surveillance network, confirms the collaborator recruitment strategies. Everything I suspected, all laid out in clinical detail with graphs and statistical analyses and projected outcomes. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is the timeline. Project Eternal Observation isn't scheduled to end, it's scheduled to expand. Phase 2 begins in 18 months. New experimental variables introduced across all zones simultaneously. Increased threat density, reduced resource availability, accelerated population stress to test breaking points. They're planning to make the Wasteland worse, deliberately, systematically, to see how much suffering humans can endure before society collapses completely. And Phase 3, scheduled for 10 years from now, is labeled Specimen Replacement. Mass population elimination, followed by vault openings to introduce fresh test subjects. They're planning to kill everyone currently surviving topside and start over with new prisoners who don't know the Wasteland's history. A complete experimental reset. We're not just inmates in a prison, we're disposable test subjects with expiration dates already scheduled. I spent 6 hours downloading everything from that facility. Every file, every schematic, every communication log. It's all stored on holotapes I've distributed to network members, physical proof that can't be denied or dismissed, evidence that even the most skeptical Wastelander can verify. The manual also contained something unexpected, a list of high-value targets, individuals the Chinese have identified as threats to experimental integrity, people who've gotten too close to the truth or demonstrated resistance potential. My name is on that list, along with detailed surveillance reports documenting my movements over the past 2 years. They've been watching me specifically, tracking my investigation, recording my discoveries, the facility destructions I thought were victories. They documented every one, analyzed my tactics, updated their security protocols based on my methods. I'm not fighting the Chinese. I'm teaching them how to defend against resistance. Every action I take generates data that makes them stronger. The other names on the list are people I know, network members I've recruited, Wastelanders I've shared information with. 3 names are marked as terminated, people who disappeared weeks ago. I thought they'd been grabbed for FEV conversion or transported to research facilities. They weren't. They were executed, eliminated as threats to the experiment. The Chinese can't allow widespread awareness, can't permit organized resistance. Individual specimens figuring out the truth? That's acceptable. That's interesting data on cognitive pattern, recognition under extreme conditions. But groups coordinating, networks forming, that threatens experimental integrity, that gets people killed. I've endangered everyone I've tried to help. Every person I've recruited into the network is now marked for elimination. My attempt to build resistance has just painted targets on the backs of the only people who understand what we're facing. Should I have stayed silent? Kept the truth to myself? Maybe more people would still be alive, but they'd be alive as ignorant prisoners, as comfortable specimens. Is that better? I don't know anymore. The ethics of resistance become complicated when resistance gets people killed, but I found something else in that facility. Something the manual calls systemic vulnerability factors. Weaknesses in the Chinese control infrastructure. Not many, but they exist. The orbital platforms maintaining the radiation fence require ground station coordination. The stations are automated but need periodic maintenance. They're located in isolated areas specifically because the Chinese don't want Wastelanders finding them. But isolated also means undefended. A small team could disable multiple stations before security response arrives. Without ground station coordination, the satellites can't adjust to atmospheric changes, can't compensate for solar activity, can't maintain precise radiation dispersal. The fence would develop gaps, temporary gaps, maybe only lasting days before backup systems activate, but gaps nonetheless. The northern window I've been planning to use? That's a natural atmospheric phenomenon the Chinese have learned to compensate for. But if ground stations were offline during that window, the compensation wouldn't happen. The gap would be larger, last longer, provide better escape opportunities. The manual also details Chinese rapid response procedures. When experimental integrity is threatened, how fast can they deploy security teams? The answer surprised me, slower than I expected. Because maintaining the illusion of abandonment is important to them. They can't flood the wasteland with obvious Chinese military forces without revealing the prison to everyone. Their strength is secrecy. Their weakness is that same secrecy. They've built a perfect system that collapses if too many people understand it exists. So I'm changing the plan. I'm not just escaping anymore. I'm creating a diversion that might let others escape too. The 3 people traveling with me. We're going to hit ground stations along the northern fence, disable as many as possible during the 30 days before the window opens, force the Chinese to choose between maintaining radiation control and maintaining secrecy. If they reveal themselves to stop us, the entire wasteland sees the prison guards. If they don't reveal themselves, the fence develops multiple gaps and people can escape. Either outcome is victory. Either outcome exposes the truth. We probably won't survive. The manual makes that clear. Security response to ground station attacks is lethal force. No capture, no interrogation, just elimination. But we're dead anyway if we do nothing. Phase 2 increases threat density. Phase 3 eliminates everyone. Our deaths are already scheduled. We're just choosing how we die. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. I've updated the network with new instructions. If we disable enough ground stations, if we create large enough gaps in the fence, they need to move. Evacuate settlements near the northern border. Prepare supply caches. Organize wagon trains. When the fence falls, they'll have maybe 72 hours before backup systems restore it. 72 hours to escape the experimental zone. Most won't make it. The wasteland between here and the Canadian border is brutal even without Chinese interference. But some will, and those survivors can establish settlements outside the laboratory, build communities the Chinese don't control, prove that escape is possible. That's the real victory, not destroying the Chinese control system. We can't do that, not with our resources. But proving resistance is possible, proving the prison has exits, that changes everything. That gives people hope where there was only despair. I've been thinking about who I used to be before I understood the truth, before I saw the patterns. I was an Enclave communications specialist, believed I was serving America's restoration, believed the organization's propaganda about purifying humanity and reclaiming the wasteland. Then, I found those Chinese intelligence files, saw the collaboration, understood that everything I'd worked for was serving the enemy. That knowledge broke something inside me. Couldn't go back to comfortable ignorance, couldn't keep serving a system I finally understood. Some Enclave members called me a traitor when I left, said I'd abandoned the cause, abandoned America. They didn't understand that America died 200 years ago. What we're living in now isn't America's wasteland, it's China's laboratory. And the Enclave aren't patriots. They're prison administrators who've convinced themselves they're heroes. Maybe I'm the traitor they say I am. Maybe resistance is futile, and I'm just getting people killed for nothing. Maybe the Chinese system is too perfect to fight, but I'd rather be a traitor fighting for truth than a patriot serving a lie. The manual contained one more detail that keeps me awake at night. The Chinese have been running smaller experiments like this in other locations, testing the methodology, refining the protocols. North America is just their largest project, their most ambitious, but not their only one. There are other laboratories, other prisons, other populations being studied under different experimental parameters. The Chinese have turned human behavioral research into their primary industry. Their economy runs on data extracted from controlled suffering. They're not just studying us. They've built their entire civilization around studying us. What does that say about humanity? That we're most valuable as research subjects? That our suffering is their most important resource? The Chinese looked at nuclear apocalypse and saw opportunity, saw a chance to turn their enemy's population into a renewable data source, and it worked. They're thriving while we're dying. Their success is built on our pain. But here's what they didn't account for. Specimens can learn. Prisoners can adapt. You can control populations through ignorance, but knowledge spreads. Truth finds a way. Every person who understands the prison tells another person. Every network member recruits another member. Slowly, carefully, awareness grows. The Chinese think they're studying rats in a maze. But rats can learn the maze. And once enough rats understand the layout, understand the mechanisms, understand that researchers exist beyond the walls, the experiment changes. Because you can't study subjects who know they're being studied. Can't maintain control over populations who understand the control mechanisms. We're approaching that threshold. Not there yet, not close, but moving toward it. Every holotape I've hidden, every network member I've recruited, every facility we've destroyed, It's all pressure building against the system, and every system has a breaking point. 28 days now until the window opens. 28 days to hit as many ground stations as possible. 28 days to create the largest diversion the Chinese have faced in 200 years. We've identified 7 stations within striking distance. Hitting all 7 is impossible, but hitting 3 or 4? That's achievable. That creates gaps. The 3 people with me, we've been preparing, gathering explosives, mapping access routes, memorizing guard schedules from surveillance logs I downloaded. Everything is planned, down to the minute. We strike the first station at dawn on day 0. Move fast to the second station. Keep moving until the Chinese stop us, or we run out of targets. Simple plan, brutal plan. No subtlety, no escape route. Just destruction and movement until we can't move anymore. The network knows what we're doing, knows the signal to watch for. When radiation levels start fluctuating along the northern fence, that's their cue to move, to evacuate, to run for freedom before the fence restores. I don't know how many will actually try. Fear is powerful. The known horror of the wasteland versus the unknown beyond the fence. Most people will choose the horror they understand, but some won't. Some will risk everything for a chance at freedom, and those are the ones who might actually escape. The Chinese manual listed me as Subject 00739. Not a name, a number. That's all I am to them, a data point. A specimen exhibiting interesting behavioral patterns. My entire investigation, everything I've discovered, it's all just data to them. Watching me figure out the prison is probably fascinating research on cognitive development under constrained information access. But I'm not Subject 00739. I'm a human being who refuses to die as a comfortable prisoner. And if my resistance is just data, if my defiance is just another research outcome, at least I'll die knowing I fought back. That means something, even if it only means something to me. To whoever finds these recordings after I'm gone, you have a choice. Ignore what you've heard and live as a comfortable specimen, or verify it and decide what that knowledge demands from you. There's no right answer, no moral imperative, just consequences either way. But know this, the fence can fall, the prison can be escaped, the Chinese aren't invincible, they're just prepared, and preparation has limits. Every system has vulnerabilities, every control structure has cracks. Find the cracks, exploit them, and maybe, eventually, the prison crumbles. 28 days until I find out if freedom exists beyond the fence, or if there's just another cage waiting. Either way, I'll know the truth, and truth is the only thing they can't take from me. This is my final testimony, my last confession. Everything I've learned about the Wasteland's true nature is documented and distributed. The network has the evidence, has the coordinates, has the instructions. What happens next depends on them, depends on you, depends on whether knowledge is enough to inspire action. The Chinese built a perfect prison. Let's see if perfect is enough.